In the first of what's going to be a very busy few months, I take my first preview of next-gen titles. Thanks to the recently released footage from Sony of upcoming titles, we've just seen Spiderman Remastered. Fortunately, I can't be covering Series X titles just yet because we haven't seen anything from them, but I am looking forward to seeing things running on the Series X and getting stuck into that soon. But here, Spider-Man Remastered is unfortunately a full release and not a patch to the PS4 version, and you can't even physically buy it. It is a download from the store, aside the US and Canada, which gets a limited release launch disc version, which I'm very envious of here in the UK. Or if you buy the new Miles Morales version, you get it free in there, the Ultimate Edition. So what does it offer? Well, two modes are here, very similar to the new game. It offers a full 4K 60 FPS mode and then a 4K 30 FPS mode, which is in contrast to the original PS4 and PS4 Pro versions, which ran at a 1920 by 1080 on the PS4, and then the PS4 Pro ran a dynamic 2560 by 1440 resolution alongside their temporal injection from Insomniac Games. It was a beautiful and still is a beautiful looking game. Very sharp image quality, very crisp, very clean, as you can see here from the PS4 Pro. So the new footage we've seen from the remastered version does have some changes, and the biggest obviously is the frame rate. Now, looking at the footage they've released and doing some pixel count across various points in the trailer, in action and in combat, I'm seeing only 3840 by 2160 every time, fully native 4K. There is no ray tracing signs evident in this shot, and obviously it's still an early build because there are some bugs and emissions that you would see in the PS4 and the Pro version, so this is definitely a work in progress build, but I'll touch on these few points throughout the preview. You can still see a very similar, almost identical draw distance, and material and objects, lighting, everything else looks pretty much identical to the original PS4 and the Pro version. There might, again, because it's an early build, changes and enhancements, but there's definitely increases on traffic and pedestrians. You can see this here, and then again a little later in the trailer as we get to the construction site, you can see the increase in pedestrian density. And obviously they probably cut down the amount of billboards and sprite imposters they're using when they're swapping them out. That was used quite heavily, and if you want to check out my full analysis of how great and beautiful this game was back at launch, I did a full analysis on this title, quite one of my longer ones, so go and check that out. I'm not going to repeat it, but you can see the crowd density, the cars have all been uplifted to the newer engine and obviously the newer hardware due to the increase in CPU and GPU throughputs. You can still get some pop-in, some shadow aliasing, the shadow cascades look the same, but there's definitely been changes to the materials. Look at the canopies of the shop front windows, the colours completely changed. It looks actually slightly more somber in the newer version than it does in the original PS4. It's a darker tone ever so slightly. Now this might be that the GI bounce is not working quite right in this early build, or it's an artistic change, but you can see the shadow quality is different. It looks worse on the PS5, but you can see those bokeh shapes on the edges and they're not present on the PS4 Pro version. So I'm actually inclined to think that they're improving the shadow maps here and adding in a little bit of that bokeh shape, so that light you should get on shadow casting for that soft diffuse edges. I'm not saying they're ray trace shadows here in this particular mode, but they certainly look to be using a soft penumbra edge, that little feathered edge on his arm and hand. Everything looks slightly softer and more diffuse than it does on the base PS4. You can see that little bokeh shape. You don't get that on the PS4. It's much sharper and cleaner. It might be the fact that they're lower, but the bokeh shapes are telling me that they're actually slightly better shadows, and they're still working on improving it. So I'm sure there's more to add in the engine, and they're basically, this is the standard practice of just bringing your old engine over to newer hardware, just like I covered way back with The Last of Us when that moved over from the PS3 to PS4. You bring it over, you get it up and running, you get time to triangle basically very quickly, and once that's done, you then start getting the performance levels where you want them to be, and then you start adding on top. You iterate, you then look at what you can improve, what can you add to keep within your target frame rate of 16 milliseconds. And that's probably where the team are right now. They're just looking at what they can add, what can they enhance, what can they improve, and generally this is still an early build, an early look at what the final game will look like, even though it's going to be out in like a month or so, 2 months. It really isn't probably a 2-month-old build. It's probably a month, 3-4 months old, this, so we'll see some improvements over this early look, and I'll be looking back at this and that version once it launches. You can see the title still uses screen space reflections on this mode, exactly the same level and quality as we saw on the PS4 Pro, and then you can see here a side-by-side example of the frame rate, the performance between the two versions. Now the PS4 Pro is a consistent 30 FPS by and large. There were some points in cutscenes, some heavy battles where it could dip, and again I covered that in my analysis. analysis. But here on the PS4 and the Pro, and the like-for-like examples playing throughout this exact same mission, exact same scene, exact same time of day, you can see at that 1440p resolution most of the time on the PS4 Pro. Here on the PS5 version, we're seeing over 2 times that, 2.25 the pixel fill rate of the PS4 version. So 3.7 up to 8.2 million pixels. That's a vast increase. So over double the fill rate and double the performance. 60 FPS over 30. And by and large, it holds on to 60 FPS. 3 dips in this section here. Very minor, likely to be ironed out in the final game. It's as close to a locked 60 FPS in this short section that we can see. So for many, that's the most important thing. There you go. The choice is there. 60 FPS if you can't deal with those horrible, filthy 33 millisecond frame times. You can also see some subtle changes to materials like on the air vent pipe on the roof of the building. But again, these might be choices for design. They might even be bugs. And this is evident by the fact that some of the alpha effects such as the steam don't seem to be present on the PS5. So I'm sure there's more to come. But right now, I don't really know how much of an improvement they're aiming for. I'm sure they're going to add a lot more to it, but this looks like a 60 FPS version of the base one, and then obviously whatever they're going to add on top of that will improve it significantly. But I think the meat of the development has really gone into the additional 4K 30 ray tracing mode.
Doctor?
Now there is another mode to talk about. And obviously it brings us back to the artistic changes in titles. And this happens all the time. It's never good to get hung up on who plays a certain character because over the years things always change. Many people have played Spider-Man, for example, over the years, Batman. Hell, even Wolverine I'm a big fan of. Hugh Jackman has kind of made that role his own. But at some point somebody will play a new Wolverine. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. So yes, they have changed Peter Parker's face. It's a completely new actor. The reason they've given is around the motion capture to basically closely match up to the face and the bone rigging of that animation, so the motion capture can be used for the facial elements and basically cut down on the amount of work you've got for animators. It's all about the pipeline and the iteration. It makes sense. I totally agree with it. Whether you don't like it or not, that's obviously up to you as an individual. I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, but it really isn't worth getting argumentative, and I've seen people on the internet getting very angry about it. But yes, definitely it's a different face. Me personally, I think it's obviously more in line with the fact they're trying to make him look more like Tom Holland because he pretty much owns the Spider-Man character now. He is Spider-Man. He's obviously in the Sony franchise because he's also working on the new Uncharted film. So this is likely an element to bring a little bit of synergy between the game and the movies, and that makes perfect sense, like I say. Now these cutscenes do show off that visually there's more work to be done. There's missing light sources, alpha effects. You can see in the background it's so dark you can't see the grills very well. There's no shadows on the grills. That dirt patch is completely missing. As our light sources here, you can see there's no light on Peter's shirt, so you can't see the fabrics as well. It's not hitting him in the front and the face, that specular, that Fresnel edge around his face. But also you can see that change to some of the objects. You can see it minor, but the button, it's a convex, or it's concave on the older version. It's convex on the newer version. So it's reflecting, it's got a specular surface that isn't there on the PS4 Pro. Then as we move further on into the trailer, you see screen space reflections. They're still there, but you can see the error is far more obvious with the occlusion error of the cup highlighting the background, reflecting that strip of yellow. It's still there in the newer version, but very, very minor. And then later on, you can quite clearly see the screen space reflections on Doc Ock's feet as he walks towards the camera. But they're not present on the PS5 version as clearly. And then as he moves further on, again, you've got extra specular on some of the objects, but in the background you can see there's no reflections of objects, which you can clearly see on the PS4. But then when his hand moves in front of the screen, it's still got the same occlusion error. So it's definitely still using screen space reflections. And you can see this on a bit when the tentacles open the bottle. It's the same screen space reflection tricks that were used in the PS4 Pro version. So overall, there's no clear sign here that they're using any kind of ray tracing at this scene at all, but I'm assuming that's what they're aiming for. And again, this is a work in progress. Look here when they pour the water out, there's no alpha splashes on top, which are there on the PS4 Pro. It's kind of basic stuff, things that they're adding back in to improve. So there's definitely areas here that they're going to work on and improve. The Gaussian blur in the background is of a high resolution, therefore it's not quite as blurry, it's sharper. You can see light sources missing. And overall, look at the materials on Doc Ock. You can see the difference and the lack of light sources throughout this demonstration. Not shadow casting light sources because they're still there. The light sources actually react to materials and light up and illuminate objects. It shows how important lighting is to highlight the best of your materials, your models, the scene. Lighting is everything. You can see it here when Peter turns around. There's absolutely no light behind him. Everything looks dark, like somebody's turned the lights off. And again, this is just they're still working on this version. And this general work in progress build, this lack of light source, is really personified at the end of the trailer, where you can see when Peter puts the glass down, there's no colour, there's no base colour albedo for the actual glass. It's not yellow anymore, it's brown, and there's absolutely no shadow at all of the cup. His hand's got a shadow, but the cup hasn't. And again, this is just because they're still working on this build. But they're obviously working towards adding these in. You can see this on the PlayStation blog. It clearly shows that Spider-Man's reflected in the objects. You can see him, and you can see below, the street below, all the cars and vehicles, which don't reflect on the PS4 version unless you quite catch it on that glancing angle, the oblique angles where screen space reflection will work, because it's just in that angle of view. It's very limited. You'd never get a shot like this. And here you go, you can see what I mean by the PS4 Pro version, where there's just that half-hearted screen space reflection that's breaking up, wrapped with a cube map behind it. Whereas on the PS5, it'll have full ray trace reflections. Now, judging from the screenshot, these will definitely be reduced LOD versions, so it'll have a combination of lower LOD versions of geometric objects, cars, trees, buildings, alphas, and on top of that, it'll use and heavily rely on those imposters, those alpha sprites, to just billboard them into the screen from the BVH grid. So this means that objects will be stuck in this little clump of memory that can be sampled from a ray that hits the reflection and bounces off screen. When it gets there, rather than drawing a full LOD 0 character that you can barely see, it will just instead sample a small little sprite which will fit on the screen, and therefore it's the best use of resource and reducing things such as bandwidth, memory footprint, triangle load, geometry load, and obviously improving performance. So it's the best balance, and these are the kind of things that optimization works on. In addition to this, you can see the self-shadowing on Spider-Man, on his neck, on his feet, where his back of his legs are touching the building, and that soft penumbra feathered edge, and at the bottom it's soft and feathered down the side, and those ambient occlusion touches on his hands and his fingers, all of that is again coming from ray tracing. So you can see where they're really working on this to improve the visual quality but keep performance high. And you can see even on Spider-Man himself, the reduction in LOD. You can see, you can't see that muscle shadow map, the normal map on his shoulder. You can see that less raised bumps on his actual logo on his chest. So this is obvious sacrifices, because you're not going to spend all your time staring at reflections like this. But that balance gives you the best of both worlds. Having the option in this game already to jump between a 4K 60 or a 4K 30 ray trace mode is exactly the kind of choices that everyone should want and be happy with. Now, in addition to this, I just want to touch on another subject, which is this, like a great many games, will be running a dynamic resolution system, and this is the best balance. Dynamic resolution, TAA reconstruction, all those elements, you're seeing it now even in the PC space with DLSS. It's the best use of hardware, it's the best use of resource to keep the performance high, and where you can't really notice it, drop the resolution very quickly and briefly to keep it at that right level. This is going to be a common situation this generation across the board. Every piece of hardware from PS5, Series X, PC, everyone's going to be doing it. So you might as well get your anger out now and just get used to the fact that this is what's going to happen, and it's the right thing. And this is early days. So the fact that they're already delivering this so quickly, so soon, yes, I'm sure many people would have wanted this to be a free patch, but there's obviously a lot of work going into this version. You can't always expect to have free things. That said, I'm sure there's going to be many titles that many will be happy with when they get free patches to support the PS4 into the PS5, boosted, improved, and delivering better use of that hardware. Just to have an idea of what's coming, look at what's in the PSN collection, the PlayStation collection titles that are in the PS Now. Look at those titles, what they offer, and what you've already seen and we cover on the PC versions, such as Horizon, Death Stranding. Look at those kind of areas, and those kind of games are the things you should be looking forward to. There's obviously a lot more to come, but if you want to get an idea of what the ray tracing solution will fully look like in the remastered version, just look at Miles Morales. There's definitely scenes in that trailer we've already seen showing off the ray trace goodness that this engine delivers. We saw the best use of it so far, I think, in Ratchet & Clank, which is coming sometime in early 2021. So there's much more to come. These are early days, and there's far more titles for me to dive into, such as GT7, which is fully targeting 4K 60 with ray tracing, and many other titles that we can touch on. This is only the start of the generation, and things are already looking very good. I'm desperate to get some hands-on time with the Series X. I've seen that now there's a lot of YouTubers have got out there, so I'm hoping that my version, my console, turns up quickly and I can get my hands on some next generation games and actually see what that title runs like. But hopefully Microsoft will launch some footage very soon, and I can dig into that footage on the Series X as well. One last little treat that the game offers, it actually has obviously fully removed the loading screens. The fast travel subway sections are now taken out, but you can turn them back on if you get nostalgic. I like that little touch. Anyway, that's it. I'm done. I hope you enjoyed this and everything else that I put together. If you do, like, share and subscribe, because all that makes a massive difference. I've just hit 40,000 subscribers, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you, new and old, that's really helped me get to that number. And it's a nice round number. But I love things in threes, and a better round number than 40 is 100, 100,000. Hopefully, this will be the year that I reach that hallowed number, because it will really help my reach, my impact, and obviously giving you guys and girls even better quality content. I'll catch you on the next one.
Liar! You have no idea what you're in for.